Podcast Answer Man, episode number 19.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Podcast Answer Man. My name is Cliff Ravenscraft, and you're listening to, yet again, another episode of the Generally Speaking Podcast Network's Podcast Answer Man, and we're here with a very special guest host with me today, one of my favorite friends, Chef Mark Tafoya.
Chef Mark Ravenscraft.
Chef Mark, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Doing well.
You're quite the world traveler.
Lately, God, I have been. I really have been traveling a lot. We're headed to Italy at the end of the week, too.
It's amazing. Yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah, we're going to Speckfest, which is the world's largest festival of speck, which is a kind of cured ham that's made in Alto Adige, the extreme north of Italy, which is sort of a combination of prosciutto and smoked ham. So we're going to that, and we're going to see some Asiago cheese manufacture, too.
Wow. And you're doing this, of course, for the Culinary Podcast Network, right?
The Culinary Podcast Network, exactly. Yeah, so we're going to be covering that. So we're going to be getting video and audio interviews, just like we always do. You know, everywhere we go, we get video and audio, and we put it out there for our listeners and our viewers to check out.
I have been watching your Culinary Podcast Network, and you guys are doing some wonderful job of the video podcasting. Where can our listeners go and find you on the web?
The easiest place is to go to culinarypodcastnetwork.com, but we can also be found on Podshow. So you can go to remarkablepalate.podshow.com or foodphilosophy.podshow.com. But everything, we have a whole aggregate feed that's available at culinarypodcastnetwork.com.
Yes.
But also, if anyone is a Podshow user, they can find my channels, and I have a video channel that's just our videos. I have the aggregate feed that's everything, and I have the Remarkable Palate. So I have channels for all the different feeds if they want to have different variations of it.
Very nifty stuff. So, Mark, I was listening to the Remarkably Mark podcast, as I am a subscriber to all of your shows, and I like to just check up and see what's going on with my good friend. And I tell you what, I'm so in love with that. I can't remember the name of that band now. You did the walk in the park, and there was that band there.
Oh, I have their CD right in front of me. It's called Break of Reality. The cello, the heavy cello thunder with the three cellos and the drums, they're really great. You can check them out at breakofreality.com. Really interesting stuff.
Yes,
I hope to have them on the podcast.
And I got to hear Mama Tafoya.
You're right. Yeah. Mama Apodaca, actually, but yeah, my mother. Exactly.
Alrighty. And then Merlin, yes, that is the correct place. He's in the chat room saying, "Is this the correct website?"
Yes, there you go. Exactly. Yeah, the culinarypodcastnetwork.com redirects to our Gilded Fork domain, which is our main domain.
Absolutely.
But yeah, exactly. You're in the right place, Merlin.
Very cool. So, as I am a subscriber to the Remarkably Mark podcast, which is really your kind of, if I was to compare it to any of the shows that I do, it'd be like the My Crazy Life for Chef Mark.
Exactly. I call it a chef's life outside the kitchen, and basically anything that has to do with that's not really specifically culinary, I put in there. So stuff where I go out and do sound scene tours. A lot of the musicians that I check out. I mean, I'm hooked up with some good music people here in New York City, and I get invited to see concerts of these independent bands. And so once in a while I'll do interviews with them, or I'll just put music out. In fact, I'm going on Tuesday night to see the Lascivious Biddies perform. And you might be familiar with the Lascivious Biddies because they have their own podcast as well called Biddycast. They are a 4-woman sort of jazz ensemble. I mean, they're jazz-ish, but they're not just specifically jazz. Their music sort of rounds out a lot of different genres, and they're just so talented and amazing. So people can check that out at biddycast.com, and I think their main fan website is Biddies Forever with the number 4, so biddies4ever.com.
Very nifty. Hey, the reason why we have you here specifically today, which, I mean, we'll have you any day you want to come, But anyway, the reason why we have you here today is because two of the most recent episodes of Remarkably Mark were recordings from two different sessions from the PodCamp Philly PodCamp that was recently held. And I had never heard, over the last year or so, I've heard of the buzz about people saying, it'd be great to kind of get podcasters together and organize them into some sort of an association so that we could really have some common language, and really haven't heard very much about the formation of such an organization or an association until just recently when I listened to your PodCamp Philly stuff, and I noticed that you were talking about something called ADM. So,
yes,
Mark, why don't you? I have released both episodes from your feed in this podcast feed. So if you're just now catching it up with this, you can find the Podcast Answer Man feed over at gspn.tv. Click on the Podcast Answer Man. The two episodes before this are directly from Mark's feed, and you can hear those sessions. But Mark,
and they're very much raw sessions. I mean, basically, I just recorded in a room where everyone was sitting and talking. So, and you get that sort of feeling. So it's not a polished show by any means. It's a group discussion, and it's a really lively discussion about this new association for downloadable media. So I guess I can give a little background on it. Essentially, and this on their website, you can find it at downloadablemedia.org. And they had their first meeting in May 8th in San Francisco, and they brought together a group of people who just happened to know each other, who had been, as Cliff mentioned, having these discussions saying, hey, maybe it's time for some kind of association having to do with podcasting that would be different from the IAB and the NAB and these different industry associations. So some of the people that were there, and I'm reading this right off their website, Pete Alcorn from Apple, Susan Bratton from Personal Life Media, Jonathan Cobb from Kiptronic, John Furrier from PodTech, John C. Havens from Blog Talk Radio, Chris Jacob from Podshow, Dan Loeb from Feedburner, Chris McDonald from Libsyn, and Mark McCrary from PodTrack, Brian Moffat from NPR, Murgesh Navar from Podbridge, Dave Osborne from Nielsen Online, Dave Prager from Rev3, Matthew Snodgrass from Porter Novelli, and Colette Vogel from Vogel and Associates. And they really just sort of got together and said, okay, well, are we going to have an association? Should we have an association? What would that mean? And so they started to just basically form some ideas with the notion that the association itself would be formed when enough people joined and then voted on what the association would be. So it's kind of like it kind of exists, but it doesn't really exist right now.
Right.
So that's kind of like the background there.
Yeah, and I think it was a great discussion. And Merlin said that discussion casts are usually the best served raw. And I agree with him there, because one of the things that I really felt is although I didn't have the ability to speak up and speak my voice or voice my questions, I really felt that I was there on the ground floor of this, the building blocks, the foundation of what possibly is going to become the Association for Downloadable Media. And there were some excellent questions that were thrown into there. I don't want to rehash the whole conversation.
Right, of course, it would not be useful for us to do that.
Exactly.
Considering people could just listen.
Exactly, and we want to encourage them to do so. And before we go into any of the discussion, I know that because of this podcast is really for the podcaster, and so I know the question's automatically going to be raised, and it's completely off topic, but yet it's on topic for this podcast. Mark, tell them what you used to record that session. What kind of hardware you used?
Oh, okay. That one actually was very, very simple. I just used the Edirol R-09, which you've probably heard Cliff and I both talking about that at length on this show and others. And I just actually, in that instance, I didn't use any other external microphone. I just used the onboard microphone. I put it in a table in the center of the room and let it rip. and then I use Levelator to even it out. And in fact, I even in the show notes said, hey, there's a few moments when it gets a little bit loud because someone who was sitting really near the recorder decided to open up a candy wrapper in the middle of the recording.
You said that, but I never picked up on it when I was actually listening. So,
Oh, okay. Well, good. Good. But it got levelated to because there are people in the back of the room who obviously weren't as loud as the people who were near the recorder. So that's why I did that. So that, that's a good trick for if you're just wanting to hear what's said and you're not so concerned about the real technical audio quality of it. I wouldn't say normally just to levelate it and be done with it because it really makes certain parts really loud and other parts really soft. So
yes,
that's what I did. So that's the meta on how that got recorded.
very cool. And for those of you who are listening, Levelator, just do a Google search for it or go to the show notes. In fact, I'm writing myself a note right now.
And you can find it. It's from Gigavox.
Yeah.
So if you go to gigavox.com, you'll find links to download the Levelator.
Levelator. I will put a link in the show notes. Okay, so basically, Mark, I wanted to basically ask you some questions, and you've already answered the first one. Number one, we want to start off by saying that you are not here to represent the ADM,
and in fact,
it doesn't even exist.
It doesn't exist yet, but I mean, it exists in that some people have started to buy memberships. You can buy an individual membership for $150, or you can buy a company membership for $1,000, and I think that gives you the right to have 5 people from your company as members. And I have not yet joined the ADM, so I am not affiliated, nor am I a member. I just happened to be at the discussion and was very involved in the discussion, and decided to put it out on my feed because that's what PodCamp is all about, right? It's all about recording the sessions and putting them out.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you just candidly, what are your initial reactions to those discussions?
Okay, well, my initial reaction when I first heard about the ADM was to say, wait a minute, it seems a little odd that you would have a group of people come together to form an association whose interests are fundamentally, I won't say opposing, but just different. You've got podcasters, you've got advertisers, and you've got people at the agencies, which are either the PR agencies or the advertising agencies, which broker the deals and make the advertising happening. All sort of in the discussion and as part of this association. And one of the main questions that I raised and that several others raised were, well, wait a minute, how can you really have an association when you've got it's almost like having, like if and this is funny because the whole question of a union came up and it got very sort of convoluted and confused because people thought, well, wait a minute, you're starting a union, and we're like, no, they were using it as a metaphor. But to extend that metaphor, it would be almost as if you had the workers and the management both in the union,
right.
It would seem as though their interests would be opposing. So now, that said, I'm not saying, oh, well, there's no way you could have an association where you had people of differing interests in it, but necessarily you'd have to really examine that separately from any association that would be just podcasters. Because obviously, if it were just podcasters, they could easily create an association with a charter and with any of the white papers or the suggestions or the industry standards that were truly in the interest of podcasters.
Right.
With all the other people involved, then you're obviously going to have something that isn't exactly all sort of directed for one group.
I heard, I think it was in the second session where the lady of the Dancers Association had spoken and said and kind of voiced that it'd be best if we didn't. That
was Gretchen Vogelsang from the Mommy Cast, and she has given her as an example that she is on the board of a dance association.
Absolutely, and she made the point that you're kind of bringing up there, and I would have to agree with her that it seems weird to bring in the opposing, if we want to call them the opposing side, but the people who obviously have their interests, their best interest at heart. But yet I do see the desire to bring in. My initial reaction is that I think an association for podcasters or association for people with new media or downloadable media, whatever you want to call it, I think that an association of some type to get people to start using the same language, to start answering the question, what is a podcast, kind of the same way, and to kind of set some standards as, what is it that maybe we can all communicate is a listener subscriber base, or what we consider to be a
Right.
download, because
Or not only that, but also what standards of measurement will you use, and the standard sort of CPM model from what we call old media. Everyone agrees that it doesn't work, but no one really has a definitive answer that will say, okay, well, this is the standard by which we will measure our podcasts or our
right.
downloadable media.
So I agree that there's a need for that, and one of the comments that really stuck in my head was there was one gentleman that talked about working on this huge advertising account and trying to describe, answer all the questions that they had about podcasting, about how they're going to measure, how they're going to pay out, and all these different things. And basically, if you added in, he said, if you added in all the time, all the billable hours as a consultant and explaining and working and doing all the meetings to negotiate all this, there was about $8,000 worth of billable hours to land a $15,000 advertising campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally get that, because
That was Matthew Snodgrass from Porter Novelli, which is an advertising agency here in New York.
And that is quite frustrating for the podcaster, because the fact is that we are trying to explain. And I will tell you, as a lost podcaster, early on I had a particular individual who wanted to advertise something very targeted towards the lost community. And he approached me and says, hey, I would love to reach your audience. How much would it be for me to advertise on your show? And what I did is I went to other podcasters out there who had the similar sized audience that I did, who were just as niche. I mean, meaning that it was just as targeted as far as the fandom. And I asked them kind of the rough estimate of what they're getting. And so I approached this advertiser with that amount, and he agreed to advertise with us for 4 podcasts. And what happened was, we had some other lost podcasters in the lost podcasting community, and what happened was they have a similar sized audience, but they basically gave their advertising away for almost free. And
that's been a big problem, I think, and that's when people talk about this wild west atmosphere of podcasting, that's what they're meaning, is that there is no standard, and for a lot of people, they're like, well, oh my God, this is crazy. Some people are getting a lot more, and some people are getting a lot less for quote unquote the same thing. I don't know if that's an assumption. I mean, I think that it isn't necessary. First of all, it isn't the same thing, because every audience is different, every show is different. But in a way, I mean, I'm kind of an advocate of, in fact, I even said in one of the sessions is that I kind of like the wild west, because guess what? We've been able to do pretty well for ourselves in this atmosphere.
Right.
Not because we're shooting out other people, but because we know what our audience is worth, and we've been able to get it in a couple of instances.
Right.
And I think a lot of other people say, "Oh, well, then lucky you." But what about the rest of us? And I'm not thinking in those terms. Obviously, I'm not saying, well, screw everyone else, forget them. I'm going to make lots of money. Because first of all, I'm not making lots of money, but but you know what I mean. It's not that, but I think that I tend to be a little concerned about the notion of fixing standards, which essentially means, one of the people in the session said it. If you're setting a floor, you're necessarily setting a ceiling.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's even useful. I mean, given that, we don't necessarily want to just replicate the model of traditional media, because that essentially would be what would happen if we were to simply set standards and everyone sort of agree, okay, well, these are what the standards are. Obviously, I know a lot of people are saying, well, we're not going to set standards as far as ad rates, but ultimately that is going to happen.
That it's going to be a byproduct of setting those standards. I mean,
exactly, yeah.
I agree that the main desire would be to set the standards by which we would maybe have a clear understanding how to communicate who our audience is, and what kind of downloads we're getting, and how we're calculating those, and so that people. The problem, you go to any advertising agency and you say CPM, they know exactly what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been able to calculate that. If a radio station talks about CPM, I mean, it's just out there. and television. They have these
Well, you mean out
standards.
there by it's ridiculous?
Well, it is both. It's just out there, but yet it's an accepted standard by which people say, okay, well, tell me what your numbers are. Which again, I think podcasters, we have such a much clearer understanding of who our audience is.
And also, I think it isn't necessarily tied specifically to the numbers. And I think that's where, if you ask any
Yeah,
podcaster, they'll tell you it's in the value of the relationship with the audience and the value that the audience perceives of the podcast itself, and the degree of ownership that listeners take. And I think your community is probably one of the best examples of that. I mean, people are. It's funny. I kind of think, oh, that's a GSPN person, and obviously, they're not a Ravenscraft, so they're not technically a GSPN person. But you have a loyal group of people that listens to your shows, and there is an enormous value in that can't be measured by downloads, nor can it even really be measured by the direct participation that they do.
and that's where I'm coming from. The whole deal is that there are two sides to this. One, it would be so great to have an association that really got the name of podcasting out there, that advertising started to understand that there is this place where they could put their advertising dollars, where that money is going to be so targeted to exactly who it is they want to reach. I mean, I'll be honest with you. There are some people that come to me and say, Cliff, I would love to advertise to your audience, and I would say, you'd be throwing your money out the window. Trust me. Number one, I don't agree.
Because you're saying that your audience isn't as interested in their product as that person thinks that your audience will be.
Exactly. It's like I know my audience, and number one, I don't believe in what you're selling, and so therefore,
okay. Well, and yeah, exactly. That's a big issue for a lot of podcasters. You have to feel comfortable with the sponsor.
Exactly, but yet at the same time, it would be nice to have these people at least understand that our advertising in podcasting, if there was some kind of way that this association, number one, could get the word about podcasting out there and what it is, and could start tracking not necessarily the standards by which people get paid, but by the success. They could start showing maybe some kind of studies and do some studies out there and put some matrix out there by which advertisers have succeeded through podcast advertising.
Yeah. Well, see, that's going to be a double-edged sword, too, because I think it's difficult to measure direct results. I mean, it's hard enough in traditional advertising to measure those results. I think it's going to be even harder in new media, because a lot of what's going on in terms of advertising is more about brand awareness and brand alignment, so to speak. Like aligning your brand with a certain demographic of people, or even a certain philosophy. Let's say, because in the case of podcasters, we each have our own philosophy, not only of how our business model, but in terms of life. Whether it's you as a Christian podcaster, whether it's me as a classical liberal, free market economist podcaster, and we each want to choose sponsors and products that are in alignment with our own personal philosophy. And I think that makes that bond even stronger, because knowing our audiences, we know that, hey, those products will probably have resonance for our audience if they match. And then just down to, for example, like you said, you're a Lost podcaster, and if you advertise a product that has to do with Lost, it's likely that even if you have obviously a much smaller sub-audience than the ABC audience, those people are highly engaged. I mean, we're freaks.
Yeah, no doubt.
We're obsessed with this TV show. So when I see an ad or hear an ad on, generally speaking, for figurines, I go to the website and check it out.
Absolutely.
But then I think that's a good example where the advertiser would be amiss to sort of measure direct sales against your advertising, because they're dealing with limited editions to begin with, so they're going to sell out anyway. But B, it's not necessarily so much about actual action that the listener takes, but that brand association, and then the trust that they therefore have for that brand because of their relationship to you.
Right. So what is the answer? I mean, what is the answer to a podcaster who, let's say, like myself, spends nearly all his free time away from his work, his wife, and his 3 children, 7 and under, who basically loves to do nothing more than to sit in front of a microphone and podcast about his passions, and has little to no time whatsoever to go out and to really knock on the doors or to even ring the telephone of the PR person of any of these firms.
It's an interesting problem, because I don't think that the ADM is going to solve that problem for anyone. I mean, obviously, no one in the association is going to have a direct interest to help you drum up business, or to help any of us drum up business. But I think it may have a residual effect, in the sense that if the discussion is happening and there's a place for the discussion to happen, then necessarily, I mean, obviously, and this is an example where having the diverse interests all at the same table will be useful for everyone. If there is an association and there's a listing of all the members of the association, it will be rather easy for you then to go find out, well, who are the names of the people at these advertising agencies that have the relationships with the clients. So if there's a specific product that you think, hey, they would be perfect for my podcast. Like, that's this, I think a good way to approach it for those of us who are podcasters is to say, well, what would be my dream sponsor? Who do I really love? Who do I talk about anyway on my show that I love, that it would be great if they actually paid me to talk about them. And then if you know who represents them, it would be much easier for you to contact those people. And if those people understand what you do and how you do it, I think that will sort of grease the rails of that particular part of the commerce.
And see, that is where I think the ADM could really assist me, because anybody who listens to any of my shows for any amount of time know exactly who that dream sponsor for the Generally Speaking Podcast Network is. And it would be so great if I could go to the ADM.
The man upstairs, right?
Well, that's one.
No, he doesn't pay for advertising.
he gets it for free. Seriously,
he gets 10%, right?
That's right. And we're working on getting him to accept our petition for I'm going to start a Facebook group. If 1 million people join this group, God will put a Chipotle in heaven. So but no, see, you missed the point. See, he gave it to us. He brought it to us from heaven. So we have a little piece of heaven on earth. No doubt. See, now let me tell you, what would it be worth for Chipotle to have what we just did? I mean, seriously. So but the thing is here's the scenario that I have. I have no doubt that on, give me an afternoon that I spend 2 or 3 hours trying to get down to the right person to talk to. If I could only send them an email with a nice little attachment from a basically an accepted association that has put together of, okay, what is a podcasting, or what is a podcast? Who else in the marketplace is involved in podcast advertising? What are some testimonials? And then I could attach to this boilerplate description of podcast advertising, then a description of the Generally Speaking Podcast Network, a little bit of information about us, how we've already mentioned them, and put down, and I've already got about 140 personalized notes from when I tried to appeal to them to let us do a live show there. I can already copy and paste this little section of testimonials of people who have gone out and tried Chipotle in a place where they visited on vacation because they don't have one locally, just because they heard about Chipotle from Cliff and Stephanie.
Well, see, what I fear is that you may have already shot yourself in the foot there, because why pay for the cow when you get the milk for free?
Well, that's
because you've been talking about them anyway. So why would they pay you? Obviously, there is value for them of doing that, because then they get to control the message a little bit. But it's a topic that CC Chapman has addressed on his Managing the Gray podcast a couple of times, where there are people who, as you mentioned earlier, will just completely undervalue their podcast, and then by extension undervalue your podcast, or make it that much harder for you to get that which you really think your podcast is worth.
Right.
I should mention that there's someone in the chat, April, who has a request to talk.
Yes. In fact, I'm going to bring April in right now. And April, you're on the line. Go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to make a comment that from an advertising standpoint, once people start to get on board with actually doing advertisements in podcasts, it's such a unique opportunity, because each podcast is such a small demographic of people. It's very specified. group of people for most podcasts that I think it'd be very beneficial once people get on board for that. The question is, how do you get people to realize that? And I just want to see what your thoughts were on that.
All right, Mark.
I think it's that ever elusive ROI, the return on investment. When it comes to business, it's doing something that makes you feel good or that sounds great isn't, in a business sense, it is of no value essentially, except for maybe the goodwill, which is sometimes of value. But really, when you talk about ROI, they want to see, okay, we spent X amount of dollars and we made X amount of sales, or we got X amount of brand recognition, or we got X amount of market share as a result of that. And it's very difficult to measure even in traditional media. And the whole Arbitron and Nielsen ratings is kind of a joke. Everyone laughs about that. It's this antiquated system where you keep a notebook and then you keep notes as to what you thought you listened to over the course of the week. It's very highly unscientific, but I think that's going to be the challenge, is finding a way to measure the ROI. That's what I was getting at earlier. I think that what we as podcasters need to focus on is not a physical ROI, but rather a sense of the message being addressed to people. We're working on a series right now for a sponsor that's going to be released probably this week. And it's a very targeted, sponsored, 5-episode miniseries that's paid for by a sponsor, but where we're really focusing on educating about the product itself, not that specific brand, but we're using that brand as the example of the product. And I think that is more about brand recognition and about associating that particular brand with really high quality, more so than it will be. If the advertiser tries to say, oh, did we get a bump in sales as a result? I don't think they will get a huge bump in sales because our reach isn't that far yet. But I think that when this industry is a little more mature, we will start to have more of a reach. And you'll see some podcasts already have that reach because they're obviously podcasts that have been sponsored by and or created by the large media companies, which just automatically have a reach.
Absolutely. Well, I want to bring up...
I don't know if that answers your question, April. I hope, though, it does.
I see a question in the chat room, and they've already said, never mind, they understand now. But I just want to point out ROI. We're using some language that we're hearing a lot in the podcasting community. And of course, ROI is big in the business community. It means return on investment.
Yeah, and I thought I said that, but if I glossed over it, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Now, one of the thing is that getting a return on investment, there are some things that podcasters, being that we're more technical in the digital age of what we're doing, there are some very unique things that we can do to help do some projections of what the ROI is. We obviously can't capture all of it, but how many people have heard of Audible, supporting all these podcasts that are out there? And it's not just go to audible.com, it's go to audible.com/whatever. They have unique URLs, and so as people click and go to those unique ROLs or URLs where it's being tracked, I think that has something to do with it. And there's also the ability to have testimonials of it's so nice to have in the podcasting community people who are technically savvy enough, and depending on how devoted of an audience you are, it'd be something for me to say, hey, you've heard Stephanie and I mention Chipotle, I don't know, a couple billion times. And if anybody has been listening to us long enough, you probably know that we spent our 10th wedding anniversary at a Chipotle, and that they gave us a free meal that evening and also lots of free burritos. Because I think, though, that
the traditional, the 10th wedding anniversary is a frijole anniversary, right?
That's right. And so basically, it would be neat for me to say, hey, Chipotle has finally come on board as a sponsor of our show, and we just want to say a special thanks. And here, there's going to be a link to the general feedback email address of Chipotle. And if you're interested in saying thank you to Chipotle for doing that, just send them a short message. There'll be a link in the show notes. With the audience that I have no doubt in my mind that would immediately generate about 180 emails to
Yeah.
them.
And I think, again, that would be measurable more in terms of the goodwill and the sort of them jumping in at the early stages of this game, and the terms of the value of that. To be able to say, hey, we were the first major, food company. And by the way, they're owned by McDonald's. So, I mean, it is a very major food company. To say, oh, we're the first to have advertised in this new medium.
Now, I will
And
tell you that
Steve wants to
they are not
press
owned by
the question.
McDonald's.
They aren't?
No, they're
I
not.
thought they were.
No, they're not owned. They used to McDonald's used to own a majority of the shares in the corporation.
Oh, okay.
And,
Well, see, there you go.
And from what I understand, they no longer do. So,
Okay.
but anyway, I have
my point
connections.
being that
I know.
my point being that I still feel like it's if we measure it in terms, even in terms of, see, and in corporate terms, 180 emails isn't a lot.
No.
It doesn't really mean, it's not even a blip on the screen in terms of the sizes that they're doing, because they're talking about, hey, we put out an ad, or we put out a TV commercial, and then the next week, our same store, the next quarter, our same store sales doubled,
Right.
which translates into $16 million of revenue, unfortunately, I think the scale that we're working on, we're just not at that point where we can move the needle by ourselves. So I think, therefore, we should focus on that other area. We should focus on the goodwill. We should focus on that they're at the cutting edge, that they're the first to support this, and in a certain way that by comparison to what they'll spend on other advertising, it's nothing.
Absolutely.
But that's part of the problem too, is that because it's so small, it's hard for them to devote any energy to it, because what would they do? They're thinking, well, God, I'm going to have to spread my budget out over 70 different advertisers. It's much easier to buy one insertion order,
right,
from a major company than it is to literally have a negotiation with 70 different podcasters.
We're going to bring April on for one more question as soon as I unmute her here. Go ahead, April.
That's a comment. I know a lot of people in podcasting tend to think of advertising in terms of downloads per episode, but I've seen a lot of people that have had success in obtaining advertising, where they may have one particular company that they that are in all their shows for like a month or 2 months, for a longer period of time. And I think it's more, the focus be more on the long run of an advertisement versus, okay, on this today's show I'm going to do this company, and tomorrow's show is going to be another company, kind of thing.
And I think you make a very good point, the long tail, because that's something that's unique to blogging and podcasting, anything with an RSS feed that you don't see in broadcast media, for example. Once it's run, anyone who's going to see it has seen it.
Right.
But in podcasting, that's that same show that I did in January, if someone links to it tomorrow and 100 new people listen to it, whoever I advertised on, whoever my sponsor was in January, is going to get more listeners.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that's a great point, April.
So let's steer this back to the ADM discussion a little bit. Obviously, one of the desires of the ADM quite clearly was communicated that this, for those who really want to monetize podcasting. I think I'm reading into that correctly. Am I, Mark?
I think so. There is a perception of that, and I think it is absolutely palpable. But I think if you talk to anyone who's been on the early organizing group, they would say no. It's not just for people who want to monetize. It's
right.
for any podcaster, anyone who's interested in downloadable media, so that they can have a voice. And one of the points that was made repeatedly, particularly by Matthew Snodgrass, but also by others, was that it has a way of sort of equalizing the discussion, that large companies within the space won't necessarily have a larger voice than Joe Podcaster. That it's sort of the idea being that it's one membership, one vote. That that theoretically the Generally Speaking Podcast Network as a member would have just as much power as PodTrack, PodShow, or Porter Novelli. In theory, I think that is so. In practice, it'll remain to be seen exactly how that's going to be. Just as it was when the early days of the Republic, where we had the large populous colonies and the small, not populated colonies, and there was a differential, between Virginia and Rhode Island,
right.
Just because of size and economic power. But in theory, everyone has the same vote. Now, obviously, they were talking about this sort of representative democracy, which of course throws that whole theory out of the water of one member, one vote, because theoretically, then if there's an advisory council, you don't get a vote.
Yeah.
Your vote only is so far as, well, I get to vote out the person who didn't vote the way I wanted. But it's not it sort of puts us in the same position we're in with Congress, where we wring our hands in frustration over our elected officials and how poorly they represent our needs in the legislature.
Right. Well, the only thing I want to say to kind of slowly wrap up the discussion here is that this is all brand new stuff. And I think this is a very interesting topic. I'm very interested in ADM. I'm not necessarily ready to go and join it yet. I'd really like to see what their charter is. I'd like to see some kind of documentation of where they do see themselves going. It would be neat to be in on the ground floor, but honestly, I personally just don't have the time for it. It's interesting though that you hear you say that, because that illustrates one of the quandaries of this whole discussion, is that they're saying, hey, anyone can have an effect on it, anyone can get in now on the ground floor and affect the discussion, but you have to be in it now in order to do that. I mean, literally, Yeah.
you can't just sit back and see how it pans out and say, oh, well, then I'll join, because at that point you have less of a chance to actually have an effect on any of it. So it's sort of a strange catch-22 right now, in that it's in formation, but you kind of have to be in the conversation for that to happen. And I'll just point out that they're going to have their first official meeting this coming Friday at the PME in Ontario, Canada, at 7:30 a.m. The ungodly hour of 7:30 a.m. And I guess that's when they're really going to sort of officially form the association. And anyone who has joined up till that point will be able to submit themselves for one of the positions. And I think it's essentially right now they're going to create 4 executive committees and 4 executive committee spots: chairman, vice chairman, secretary, and treasurer, and then 11 advisory board seats and 5 committee chair positions. And there's all that information at the website at downloadablemedia.org.
Yeah, and I really want to stress to podcasters out there. I know we have seasoned podcasters that have been doing this ever since the very beginning. We have people who are probably going to launch their very first podcast this week. This is a topic that I think that we should all be keeping our eyes open to see what's going on and follow this. And Chef Mark, I want to thank you very much for making me aware of the ADM and sharing those awesome audio broadcast or recordings in your Remarkably Mark podcast feed. And also want to thank you for coming here and having a conversation with me about that here today.
Well, anytime. And again, I just want to repeat that, I am not, I don't have an interest in ADM other than my interest as an individual podcaster to see sort of what happens in the industry. And I feel very strongly that this is a viable industry and that we can make it work. However, if you want to do it as a hobby, or if you want to do it as a business. Personally, I'm focusing on the business aspects and doing a pretty good, feeling pretty good about the results we're having so far. And my concern is that any things that are decided upon by an association sort of might have an effect over my ability to individually negotiate things, and that's where I'm going to be really watching out, as to what's going on with the ADM.
Very cool. And I'm going to play some brief music to take us over to a public service announcement here. All right, Chef Mark, I have a public service announcement and a public apology announcement to make here. Are you ready for this?
Absolutely.
I want to confess that I have been very bad in that I have forgotten about the world and universe at large that do not use iTunes. And what I mean,
haven't been promoting your RSS feed other than your iTunes feed?
Nope. This is even more severe than that. And I think this is something that all podcasters need to hear. And I'm also going to share it for you, Chef Mark, because I think that this came up as a result of releasing 2 of your shows into my feed at the same time I was doing this on my other shows.
Okay.
However, what I get used to doing is releasing my shows, uploading them to my server, and then I will go in and do a blog entry, which will, of course, create the title and I'll put in the link to the actual MP3 file. And when iTunes goes and it checks the RSS feed, it pulls down that MP3 file and it completely rewrites the tags from the RSS feed. And so therefore the title of the show is exactly the title that I chose in the blog entry. And the artist and album and all of that stuff is pulled in by the RSS feed that I originally set up for the show. So anybody that gets my podcast and downloads the MP3 file from iTunes will get it perfectly formatted. And so therefore, even if they use a non-iPod, even if they use like a I don't know, an MP3 player of any type.
God forbid.
No doubt. I know that there's some other MP3 players out there. I just can't think of any at the time. But
there's the iRiver, there's the
Creative
M Audio,
the Creative Zen.
Lab, there's the Zen. There are a lot of actual MP, and there's also little USB thumb drives as well that people use.
So any of those that have a display, which there are plenty of them out there, if they're using iTunes to actually download and then port them onto their device, then it's no problem at all. However, there are quite a few people out there that are using some other podcatcher, or maybe even just the RSS feed aggregator, to go and directly download those MP3 files straight from the server without it being processed through iTunes. And what happens is that if we do not, as podcasters, edit our ID3 tags before we upload them, then it's very difficult for our listeners to kind of navigate those shows. And I recently...
Are you saying that if they're not listening with iTunes, they won't be able to get the ID3 tags?
No, they get the ID3 tags if only if we upload them. And so I got an email from a friend of mine that says, you just released two identical files in your podcast Answer Man, and they were both from Podshow. So for some reason there was no.
Those were my files that
yes.
you put in there,
and
that
so
were not recognized as individual files.
Well, I guess the ID3 tags seem to be identical from part 1 and part 2. Is what I was getting, but this is.
Well, I know for a fact that they weren't.
Oh, okay.
But they were similar, but they weren't identical.
Okay. Well, I will tell you that what recently I have been doing, I've been using GarageBand to process a lot of the recordings that I've done, and they have this ability to go in and just put in, some standard stuff. I have gspn.tv put into the album, the artist, and everything. And
now you are going to mention that GarageBand is only for the Mac, right?
That's right. They're quite aware of that. And then what will happen is...
Banjo Band, as my friends at the Little Fatty Cast would call it.
So the problem that I've been running into is I've not been clearly laying out the actual title of the show. It'll record as... it'll just say PAM, because I just give it a temporary name. And or I'll put in MCL just for My Crazy Life, but I don't describe what that show is in the title tag in the ID3 tags.
Right, but you can also use iTunes itself to edit your ID3 tags manually.
Right, and that's what I should have been doing ever since I started using GarageBand, but I had not done that. I just kind of assumed that everybody uses iTunes, and that's where I come with this public service announcements of saying. Podcasters, it's very important for us, if nothing else, to use a standard artist and album tag, and
number of the show.
And the number of the show is somewhat important, but at least a description of in the title field for the ID3 tags. And I've been extremely guilty of letting that go because I just trust that iTunes does that, which it does. But for my non-iTunes podcast catching friends, I apologize to you, and I can assure you that this podcast here, whether you get it on iTunes or not, will have a clearly titled ID3 tag.
Okay, great.
Very
so this
cool.
is less of a PSA and more of a mea culpa.
There you go. Well, that is all we have for this episode of the podcast Answer Man. And Chef Mark, as always, it's been a pleasure, and I'm sure you'll be back with me again very soon.
Absolutely.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
create your own internet talk show. Check it out at talkshoe.com.